1908, in one respect, it was a very different kind of environment that we were living in. It was the Gilded Age. It was exactly 1 year after the financial panic of 1907, the second greatest financial crisis in the last 100 years. It was the center of It was the center of the industrial age. That was the year when the Model T first emerged. Teddy Roosevelt, trustbusters extraordinary, Upton Sinclair worrying about the meat packers and all the regulation that came out, eerily reminiscent of the Chinese milk producers that we've been worrying about for the last month. It was the middle of the first great age of globalization and in a very different kind of environment. It was 12 years before the women had the vote. Harvard's African-American students lived down the railroad yards in the Pullman quarters and came up 5 times a week. In one way, it seems very, very long ago. On the other hand, as far as I'm concerned, it's quite near. Because remember the Harvard College class of 1959. As I watched forward to get my degree, there was the 50th reunion class of 1909, and they looked to be reasonably healthy and with it. So in one respect, 100 years is a long time. In the other, it is actually a very short time. And finally, the Empress of China died. We do not believe that in the Forbidden City our inauguration was noted, nor do we believe we paid much attention to that event, which was the beginning of very important things in China. The beginning. The start of the Harvard Business School required great discussion, all kinds of debate. Under President Eliot, we talked seriously about becoming a school of railroad management. That did not seem to be a very promising thing. There were deeper discussions about how we should be a school for training diplomats. Our graduates could, in fact, go and live in the embassies around the world. That also did not seem to be very high impact. Throughout the whole thing, arguing about the fact that a profession of business management was emerging and that we could make a contribution to the humane, broad education of the leaders. In 1906, President Eliot launched the first Harvard fund drive for HBS. In 1908, we were launched as a 5-year experiment underneath the Department of Economics, where we could hastily be folded back in case there was a mistake, under the strong sponsorship of government professor Lawrence Lowell, soon to be president of Harvard University. Financial support came from the Rockefeller Foundation for 5 years, and we were put together as a graduate school of business administration. Each of those words was painfully argued out as we talked about training people for a profession. And the guiding thought that runs from then until today was put together by our first dean, Edwin Gay. The mission of the school, to train people to make a decent profit decently. It was the decently that basically opened up the broad arena of everything that we talked about and legitimized the full breadth of all of the research programs and the outreach that we are looking for. We launched in 1908 with 37 quote-unquote regular students, 47 special students. I've been able to find out exactly what they were, other than they were obviously warm bodies who were not seen after the first year. In fact, only 1/4 of the students at the end of the first year felt there was any need to come back for the second year because they basically had it all. Started in Harvard Yard with 15 faculty. That was one thread. In the meantime, a quite different set of activities. The corporations of Harvard and MIT, after intense discussion, decided that they should merge, that there should be a single merged institution. And the land that we are here now was acquired to hold that institution. This land was to hold the merged science programs of merged Harvard and MIT. Neither faculty was very enthusiastic about it, and that made no difference whatsoever. What did make a difference was that there was some suspicion about the ownership and deed of covenants of the MIT properties around Kenmore Square, and the thing was blown apart by the Massachusetts Supreme Court. That we were incredibly lucky that Boston has two great universities as a result of it. In the meantime, because history just takes a little time to go on, the new 500,000 square foot stem cell research center is now being built on the edge of our campus, and we look forward for the next 25 years, deeper and more science coming in this particular part of the university. This is what we look like in 1908, a pretty unpromising thing. Jay Light and I almost came to blows the other days as to whether the Anderson Bridge was in this and what exactly was that coal company, but we both missed the point. This was pretty unpromising land 100 years ago. 1909, the first 8 MBAs graduated, and we broke ground because we wanted our graduates to actually be able to read their diploma. So these were the first Harvard diplomas that were actually in English. And in 1909, the first 2 foreign students entered the Harvard Business School, and our first series of international courses were introduced. Globalism and internationalization has been at the heart of the school from its very beginning. In 1910, then President Lowell basically recommends that we be an independent, standalone school, and in 1912, we are separated from the Department of Economics, and we're off and running by ourselves. 1911, the Division of Research is founded. From the very earliest origins of the school, it has been much more than a school that simply trains people for the practice of administration. It is a research school in a research university. This has been deep in our tradition. Some of the really great ideas that have come out of administration have come from the work of this faculty over the last 100 years. In 1914, the Harvard Business School Alumni Association is formed and has run continuously ever since. World War I, the school basically shut down. But the concept continued to percolate, and in 1919, 307 students entered the school that fall. The case method. In 1920, Dean Dunham, looking at the law school, thinking about the ideas of cases for legal precedents, thinks this is a wonderful idea for the Harvard Business School. And as often in our history, we do the right thing for the wrong reasons. We got the campus for the wrong reason. The idea of libraries of business cases for historical precedents, it didn't work. However, as research engines and teaching for the teaching instruments, absolutely at the core of what we've done. 19,000 cases written between 1920 and 1947. That this has been, again, from almost the earliest stage of the school, the case method has, in fact, been at the heart. We were able to haul out of the archives the very first case, a picture of it is up there, and we taught it in a number of first-year sections last year, and it generated almost as lively discussion as it did then, and not much more enlightenment on part of the students either. But that is another issue. 1920, we begin another tradition. We have recruited our faculty not just from business, but people who are broadly trained, deep skills, and we have been able to then subvert them to our agenda. Malcolm McNair, a Shakespeare scholar, went on to be one of the truly great retail professors, in the school. Ken Andrews, Elton Mayo, Robert Schlafer, all of them came from very different traditions, highly original, creative minds, and were able to be attracted, to our agenda and added a great deal to what it is that we have as a school. 1922, again, training future scholars becomes an important part of our mission, and the Doctorate of Commercial Science is added by the university. The first issue of the Harvard Business Review comes in 1922. Again, from the earliest roots of the school, our ideas of communicating our ideas in a broad way. 1924, one of the great fundraising calls of all time. Bishop Lawrence goes down to New York to talk to the great financier, George Baker, to ask him for support of the new school. George Baker does not think much of the idea, and as sort of a going-away present to Bishop Lawrence said, here's a check for $10,000. Why don't you do what you want with it? And Bishop Lawrence rises up in his great robes, says, I'm not interested if that is all you can think about. His sheer skill, no doubt from his ecclesiastical training, somehow caught George Baker's attention. The dialogue sat down, and it actually turned out that $5 million to name a campus in his name was actually the right idea. In 1926, the movement of HBS took place, from Harvard Yard, some 750 students. We have a picture here of Baker Library. Carefully not shown is how far did the lawn go from Baker Library out towards the river. It is entirely believed that half of you would be sitting in water had you been here sitting in the same seat in 1926. George Dorio, one of the truly great faculty members of the school, in 1926 teaches manufacturing for the first time. An absolutely legendary course that had nothing to do with manufacturing whatsoever. I was first introduced to George Dorio when I'd been accepted to the school, and I was having dinner with my uncle, a member of the class of 1937. And he was telling me at the business school. And he said, Warren, whatever you do, don't go near George Dorio. He is a dangerous man. And as he described the cold calls in his class and how this was a very threatening place, I found my competitive instincts rising. The very best course I took in the school was manufacturing. It ruined the rest of the second year. 60% of my time was in George Dorio's course. He started with a very simple proposition, which made a lot of sense to me at age 22. He said, I've had 40 years of business experience. You've all had basically none. Until you have proven otherwise, we will assume I know what I'm talking about and you don't know what you're talking about. This actually made a good deal of sense to me. George Dorio went on. He is seen as the father of venture capital, American Research and Development, an extraordinary organization, founder of INSEAD in 1957, an example of the extraordinary faculty that we had during those years. In 1928, a remarkable research project. The Western Electric Labs engaged our faculty to help them understand the usage of light in work. The question was, too little light, did people slow down? Too much light, did they get blinded and slow down? And that was the project that was to be studied. And a devoted team of Harvard researchers went there and they studied this room right here. And they worked and they talked with the people. And when the light went up, productivity went up. When the light went down, productivity went up. When it was dark, productivity was extraordinary. It turned out light didn't mean a damn thing. But caring and touching people really did mean something very important. And that was the beginnings of all of the work that went on in organization behavior, for which our faculty has in fact been so well known. By 1930, 1,100 students on campus. That by 1932, why under the recession, enrollment had dropped by 13%. And the 25th anniversary of the founding of Harvard Business School was a reasonably subdued event, right in terms of the times. Jay and I are very proud of ourselves. We believe we've done remarkable things in helping to bring Harvard to China. What I have here for you is a picture of the first meeting of the Harvard Business School Club of Shanghai in 1934. Before either of us was born, there was a Harvard Business School Club of Shanghai, 1/4 in traditional dress, the rest in Western dress, as in fact we already begin work in that part of the world. Not surprisingly, in 1942, the Harvard Business School of Shanghai is suspended, along with, I might add, the Harvard Business Club of Paris. And as a later slide will point out, in 2006, we recreated the Harvard Business School Club of Shanghai as a prohibited social organization. But that is another thing for another day. World War II was quite different. That the MBA program was shut for 2 years. Much of the faculty stayed here, and we turned into an intense industrial education training effort for the war. Some 6,400 people attended our programs, and during 9 different programs for that particular point in time. You see here pictures of simply the troops marching back and forth on the campus, and out of that came the notion that mid-career executives really do need education, and our advanced management program came directly out of this. In 1945, it was put in place for the first time. During 1945 to 1960, as we continued to grow executive education, we reached again heavily around the world to help found more than 20 different business schools, all using the case method at the core. IMADE, INSEAD, IEC, INCAI, IPADI, Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and so forth. All of them helped to get started by our faculty as we sought to take our way of teaching and thinking and broadly export it around the world. Again, you come back to Edmund Gay very much in that basic mission. The Aldrich classrooms. In 1951, after an incredible amount of research and so forth, we decided to put our beliefs in concrete, and we built Aldrich Classroom. But there were prudent people in those days, and just in case the case method didn't work out, there were no internal sustaining walls, so therefore the whole classroom could be torn out and turned into traditional lecture halls. We are still waiting for that, but it goes on. The faculty doubled during this period of time. 1953, the DCS program is replaced by the DBA program, and there is an explosion of research output. In the spirit of the times, in 1958, our 50th celebration is celebrated by a rededication service at Memorial Church. I had many ideas from many people about this event. That one did not cross my radar screen. It was, however, followed by a dinner in the great HBS tradition. Deep, fundamental changes in the very nature and architecture of the MBA program came in the late 80s when the Ford Foundation issued a report basically castigating business schools for inadequate commitment to hard science, numbers, things of that nature. That led on our campus to the Anthony Committee, headed by Bob Anthony, looking at this and the redesigning of our MBA program to take what came to be called managerial economics and driving it into the MBA curriculum 1960, 61, 62. I was one of the earliest recipients of it. I remember it. There were 3 utterly unintelligible weeks on control. And I remember I and my section mates going to the final exam and said, please, let there be nothing on these statistics on the final exam, or we are out of here. The faculty, understanding that neither they nor we knew what was going on, chose to examine other parts of the skill base. That changed in a deep and powerful kind of way. 1960, perhaps the best-known Harvard Business Review article ever published. Ted Levitt's Marketing Myopia. Almost 1 million individual copies of it sold. His tremendous insight: you are not in the railroad business, you are in the transportation business. An article that rings as firmly today in 2008 as when it first came out. And we see the quantitative courses going through the curriculum. The mix of the MBA program changes quite dramatically in 1963. Before that, it was made up of people who all male, all came to class wearing white shirts, ties, and generally looked of a particular mold. In 1963, the first group of 8 women joined our MBA program, and that led to an ever greater evolution of more complexity, more diversity inside the program. I have beside this simply a picture of the class of 1982. You will see the dress code, whatever it was long gone by 1982, and we're on to more cheerful ways of operating. 1966, the first computers arrive on the campus, and we begin a very intense engagement of information technology that has gone from then until today. 1968-69, probably the worst years I spent on the campus. As you walk to dinner tonight and you walk by the corner of Baker Library and Aldrich Hall, think of 1,000 students presided over by George Baker, protesting the very legitimacy of higher education, the Vietnam War, and everything. I remember walking by and wondering if, in fact, the entire social contract might unravel. Those were difficult, complicated years inside the university, and somehow we worked through them and went on. But it left a scar in everybody who was there at that point in time. We begin the first of what has grown a great deal, partnerships with other part of the university as we put in place the joint MBA JD program. In the 1970s, executive education changes dramatically. All private executive education leaves the campus. That executive education grows dramatically in multiple kinds of ways, all with school-sponsored programs, and we set up the school's first permanent international activity in Vevey, Switzerland, where for 10 years, a total of 30 faculty members basically spent 2 years there with their family. It would be fair to say that was one of the great turning points of the school. Living over there for 2 years, having to write cases in Europe and so forth, nobody came back from that as a faculty member with other than a commitment that it was a broader, deeper world beyond the United States. It was a remarkable program that basically helped change us and drive it deeper, into the faculty consciousness. Research continues to expand. In 1977, 29 books, 153 articles. The 1980s, Michael Porter's competitive strategy arrives with an explosion on the landscape. 3 million copies published by 2007. One of the great experiences I had in my career at the school was the 5 years that I was head of the Division of Research. Mike Porter was one of my responsibilities. I always saved Mike for a day when I had difficult appointments, because when I'd walk into his office and I could see 20 new books, 1 hour with Mike, I would come back re-energized, reinvigorated, and go on to do the rest of the task. By 1984, for the first time, every student acquires a computer. I would like to say this was a resounding success. In fact, as years go by, and I've heard what happened to many of those computers, they were, in fact, best described to me at a reunion 5 years ago with a young couple saying, we met at the Harvard Business School. We each had to get one of those huge, luggable computers. They make a terrific boat anchor lashed together where our Boston whaler is in the lake. We were the second school in the country, however, to go on and do that. Executive education continues to expand, and a rapid growth of students from East Asia and then South Asia. For our 75th anniversary, it is 16 research colloquia, a number of books, as again, we try to go back, rededicate ourselves to doing even further and deeper work, in the area of research. Over the past 20 years, it has been first deeper engagement in every way with the rest of the university. Joint PhDs in business economics, sociology, psychology, technology, as we are learning to work across what used to be a very wide river, but really actually is only about 200 yards. Joint master's programs with a number of Harvard schools, Kennedy School, medical school, public health. Some of the most interesting students I have in my first year section come from absolutely non-traditional, kinds of backgrounds. They add enormous things to our discussion, and I believe we add enormous things to them. HBS Publishing is created as we go far beyond the HBR, selling cases and a whole variety, books and a whole variety of other things around, the world. Entrepreneurship, added as a special school area. The seeds founded by George Dorio and captured by so many of our alumni over the years, we formalized this into an area, and it is now a required course, in the first year as it goes deep to the heart of what we're trying to do. Social enterprise. And again, I come back to Edmund Gay, an extraordinary activity spearheaded by John Whitehead, who gave us ultimately a $15 million gift to make that happen. But John did not get his MBA from Harvard for nothing. We did not get the money all in one fell swoop. It came out on performance earnings. And when we did this, we did more and more and more until we have over 30 faculty members involved in one aspect or another of this terribly important thing. Technology, it suffuses every single aspect of the campus and alumni life. 110 people work to make the various aspects of technology work across the school. And the tagline put together by Kim Clark, leaders who make a difference, becomes a shorthand for talking about what it is that we do. Global research centers all around the world, Hong Kong, Mumbai, Paris, Buenos Aires, Tokyo, Palo Alto. We are getting right now to put a new research office in Shanghai. I've already interviewed 2 people as a potential director for that operation. They're there first to do research, write cases. Maybe we'll also be using them later for executive education, facilitating MBA program visits, and a whole variety of other kinds of things. Our first major capital campaign, launched under the leadership of Howard Stevenson and completed with the aid of many of you in this room with enormous success. 2006, as I said, the Shanghai Club reorganizes, a prohibited social organization, but nobody cares, a classroom to follow behind it. What is it that are the enduring themes of the Harvard Business School? I think there are 8, and most of them are rooted deep back in our early history. We are a field-oriented research case method school. That is how we do our research, that is how we do our teaching, and it has been that way ever since 1920. From the very earliest parts of the school, this has been important. Secondly, deep research impact on practice. That right from 1911, when we put in place the Division of Research, we have always tried to live to our obligation as an important part of a great research-oriented university. Communication at every step. That picture I showed you, the first issue of the Harvard Business Review in 1922, in every conceivable way, we're reaching out in multiple ways around the world. Faculty, we look for highly remarkable kinds of people. We look for people who we think can, in fact, grow to meet our agenda. And I don't actually care so much what their PhD is in. I care whether they are creative. I remember interviewing many years ago a member of our faculty coming in as a doctoral student, and I can remember him standing up in front of the interviewing process and looking out and telling us, my doctoral thesis, it is too complicated for you at Harvard to understand. So I will talk about a little field application where I think you will be able to understand it. And he then did the field application with such brilliance. I said, this is a terrific, creative person. The thesis is something I have no interest in. But nonetheless, the thesis had to be dealt with. And so at the end of the first year, we have a summer executive program. And always the rookie in the faculty gives a 1 hour and 20-minute lecture on a topic near and dear to his interest. And I told the faculty member, I said, Harvard faculty can't understand your work, but line managers, they're deep, conceptual. They understand this stuff. The hook was laid out and it was swallowed. He said, what a terrific idea, Warren. 10 minutes into the presentation, I never heard of this thesis again. And we went on to have a terrific colleague. We bring people from many kinds of directions. The faculty is, in fact, the heart of the school. Jay probably spends more time worrying about that than almost anything else. We are a technology-friendly school. We have been a technology-friendly school from the time I first joined the faculty. We have looked at new technologies. We have examined them hard. There was a long-gone faculty member by the name of Ed Learned in 1967 who basically was asked to do a study as to whether computers had any relevance to the Harvard Business School at all. I looked at that with great concern because as somebody who taught information technology and computers, a bad recommendation there could cause me real trouble. Fortunately, he got it right. Our then dean cursed him and spent the necessary millions of dollars to get going. Always, Always globalization at every step along the way. From 1909, it has been courses, and it has, in fact, been students at every step of the way we reached around the world. And finally, of course, for a gathering like this, of all the things we take most pride in, it is our alumni, the extraordinary achievements that all of you have made. This, of course, is why we, in fact, spend our time. Now, most of my students are tough-minded people. They go on to great and outstanding careers. Every once in a while, I have somebody who just can't leave the nest. And back in 1967, I had a remarkable doctoral student in our summer accounting course by the name of Jay Light. To our everlasting good fortune, Jay has spent his entire career with us. I started with the professor-student relationship. It is now a very benevolent line manager subordinate, as long as I stay in line, that is. It is with great pleasure and pride that I introduce my former student, the 9th Dean of the Harvard Business School, Dean Jay Light.
Thank you, Warren. Those were fantastic pictures and a fabulous history of this very special place. Professor McFarlan hasn't changed one bit since 1967. He brings the same energy he did then to this extraordinary gathering. We are so lucky to have Warren, who, if you count the years he's been at Harvard, spans more than half of our 100 years. He has been a fantastic leader of this school, and that continues, as you can see, to this day. And to all of you, welcome to our Global Business Summit, the highlight of our centennial. We are really glad to have you here. Indeed, we're honored to have you here. You know, it's not every day that one has a 100th birthday. And with Warren and others, we have been thinking about what to do for this centennial. First, we decided to have a very long birthday. It started about 15 months ago with its first events. And as many of you know, we have had events both here on campus and around the world that are part of that centennial, all of which are feeding in to the culmination of that birthday, which is these 3 days here in Cambridge. As we have before, our plan during the centennial is to celebrate a little, but not a lot. We really want to spend most of our time reflecting on who we are, reflecting on where we came from, reflecting on how the world is changing, how the needs and character of business must change, and how we as the Harvard Business School can do a better job preparing leaders for that world of business. The world is changing very fast, uncomfortably fast in some weeks like the last several. It is for sure an increasingly global world, not just financial markets, although them for sure, but also supply chains and organizations and leaders. It continues to become one of the greatest challenges going forward for the future leaders of tomorrow. It's also a world of business that's driven much more by science and technology than ever before. And the pace of change in those areas is, in fact, accelerating rather quickly. Organizations are also quite different. They're flatter. They're more networked. They're less hierarchical. They're quicker to change. They're more cross-cultural. They're harder to understand, and they're harder to lead. And finally, much more is being expected of business leaders than ever before. Our mission has been to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. From time to time, the press will feature an article, is management education still relevant? Is the MBA still relevant? What we believe here is the answer couldn't be any clearer. The answer is, of course. In fact, it's much more relevant than it has ever been. The need for leadership in the world today is at least as great as it's ever been. The need for what we do is at least as great as it's ever been. We have to challenge ourselves and continue to ask, how can we do it better? But the need and relevance of what we do here at the Harvard Business School has never been more important for the world than it is tonight. In the last few months, a new challenge has raised its head, a severe global financial crisis. We'll be talking about that over the next couple of days. At one level, what has gone on is actually quite simple. A housing bubble here in the US and in some parts of Western Europe has burst and collided with what I would describe as a recently evolved and complex global financial system. We all failed to understand how much that system had changed in the last 15 years or so, and how fragile it might be because of increased leverage, decreased transparency, and decreased liquidity. Three of the crucial things in the world of financial markets. And we all failed to understand how that fragility could evidence itself in frozen short-term credit system, something that frankly hadn't really happened since 1907. We also probably overestimated the ability of the political process to deal with the realities of what could happen if real trouble developed. What we've witnessed is a stunning and sobering failure of financial safeguards, of financial markets, of financial institutions, and mostly of leadership at many levels. We will leave the talk of fixing the blame to others. That is not very interesting. But we must be involved, in fact, in fixing the problem. In the short run, that means restoring confidence in our institutions and markets. And we don't have much time to get that done in. And in the long run, it means building an entirely new financial system with a new set of regulators, a new set of regulations, and frankly, a new set of firms quite unlike what we've seen before. These tasks will require money, capital, good decisions, but most of all, these tasks are going to require leadership. And the Harvard Business School and Harvard Business School alumni and Harvard Business School faculty need to be a part of the solution to these problems. The long-run effects of this crisis are very uncertain. Certainly, we're going to have a drastically changed financial system. It can't possibly go back to looking like it did recently. And that means there are going to be different careers our students are changing, that are going to change in ways we don't yet understand. I also think that there's going to be broad-scale change in the very culture of how business is done. And I think there are going to have to be broad changes in the Harvard Business School. The tectonic plates have clearly shifted over the last month in ways that I think none of us understand. But I think we all do understand that things are really going to be different as we move forward. We at HBS have been through changes before. Indeed, as Warren suggests, things changed here in the 1920s, in the Great Depression, in World War I and World War II, in the post-war recovery, in the Vietnam era, and in the great global growth area we have just exited. The school was different in each of those, and it will be different again. In my remarks tonight, I want to focus on just two of those periods. I want to focus on first the very birth of the Harvard Business School, and then I want to focus on the current financial crisis that we find ourselves in. First, to the crisis. I wanted to read from an article published by a friend of mine, Bob Bruner, at the University of Virginia. Read a description that he's written down. To understand fully the crash and panic, one must consider its context. A Republican president has been in the White House. War has been fresh in mind. Immigration has been fueling dramatic changes in society. New technologies have been changing people's lives everywhere. Business consolidators and their Wall Street advisors have been creating large new combinations through mergers and acquisitions, while the government has been investigating and prosecuting prominent executives led by an aggressive young prosecutor from New York. The public's attitude towards business leaders, fueled by a muckraking press, has been largely negative. Much of this has been stimulated by the post-war economic expansion that, with brief interruption, has lasted about 50 years. I'm sure you recognize the time he's talking about. It's 1907. The parallels are eerie. What happened in 1907, during that context, was a speculative bubble popped. And the third largest financial trust in Wall Street, the Knickerbocker Trust, failed. The failure of the Knickerbocker Trust brought down several other trusts and left all of the large banks in New York City quaking. Interbank lending stopped, banks failed, and rather hastily bank mergers were thrown together. The short-term credit market froze, and the stock market went down 50%. As with everything in those days, it happened much more slowly than it happens these days. But in fact, the pattern was clear. It was at that point that J.P. Morgan and George Baker, that's right, our George Baker, stepped in. And along with the Secretary of the Treasury and with Jacob Rothschild, they said it stops here. Committed their personal fortunes and their vision and a little bit of skill at pasting together some hastily arranged combinations to, in fact, restore confidence in the system. The episode was a perfect metaphor for today, much more so than any other time I know, with one exception. Where are George Baker and J.P. Morgan when we need them, and who will play that role? A rather severe economic recession set in. Actually, it was very severe. And 1908 was an interesting year. In 1908, in Washington, something happened, and in Boston, something happened. In Washington, something called the Peugeot Commission was set up. It basically got involved in what I would